So we're talking about SOMAR and how it fits into the grand scheme of things.
Well, here we are on Satan's throne. Satan sits arrayed in all his earthly splendor. What was the question again?
Well, SOMAR, as an event, as I guess more than just a fundraiser, or I guess kind of in your mind, what is the role of SOMAR as a part of the project?
Well, the role of our shows in town, aesthetically, is to bring the desert back to the city. And it's taken us 3 years to begin to arrive at a strategy by which to do that. We look for spaces that in which we can make grand gestures that exceed the normal bounds of urban space. This hall is wonderful for that. It has this magnificent perpendicular dimension, and it's comprised of 2 grand axes that you can move along, which is important to us because we want to create a show that's participatory, at least in some respects, as the Black Rock experience is. So a space such as this allows us to make the art mobile and to create peripatetic performances, so that at no point does the audience find itself passively static. The idea is to break open the box. Where I'm sitting, Satan's Throne, is an interactive installation. It's an all-night sideshow in which people have the opportunity to walk up and be greeted by the evil one and receive their complimentary succor and then descend on his right hand and have their soul sucked physically from their body. And this is not like a normal art exhibition. People don't stand back from it and inspect the art as if it were upon an antiseptic slide, but rather it requires an action. It's a joke that once you have them laughing, you begin to disarm them emotionally and make them more available to experience. And of course, the Black Rock is all about immediate experience, and so that's those are some of the ways that that we can at least evoke the experience of the desert. It's also this is also a naked piece of promotion. It draws. It's a way of propagandizing. It's a way of getting the word out that we are out there in the desert and enticing people to come out and join us. And it's also, frankly, a way to pay for the project. Most people don't pay for an adventure like this until the last moment, and that's the one piece of spontaneity we don't appreciate. And this helps our cash flow, and it gives us a freshet of cash just about the time that we're running out of it, and we're running out of it all the time. And we're undercapitalized, as they say. In fact, we've never been capitalized. We've never had capital. All we've ever had is what we can immediately take in. And so that helps to give Burning Man's create a basal economic metabolism for the man. And it allows us to spend money ahead of time so that we can ready things in some kind of reasonably timely fashion. If you want to know about the theme, the other purpose of this is to announce the theme of the desert. We've taken, this is the first year we've had a coherent theme, And we've always had little themelets that we played out, and little strands of narrative that we worked into some of the performances that we crafted in-house. This year, we've turned the Avenue of Art into an application of a modern version of the Inferno tale, and so this is the overture. This announces the theme that will be played out across a quarter mile of desert in the desert. Let's say quarter mile of desert in the desert. Well, so this is just a little taste of hell, as it were, a teaser for the grander program that will happen out there. The reason we do a theme like that is if you have a theme, I found, it allows people to collaborate much more readily. You have some governing context or generalization that allows people as members of a community to fit their disparate efforts into one single enterprise. And so in that sense, it's an excellent device for constructing any kind of communal effort. You need some kind of overarching context that people can relate to. And if it's the right theme, if it's a popular theme, if it's a general theme, if it has some kind of primal pull for people, then everyone can find some interpretation unique unto themselves, which they can contribute to the general effort.
Great.
From Southern California, Dr. Gene Scott. How can you be from Southern California and not know Gene Scott? You've never seen Gene Scott? He's the greatest evangelist in America. He's incredible. Yeah, he wears funny hats and he wears bifocals over his sunglasses and when they come in to collect.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, you know Gene Scott. And then he always plays to the peanut gallery. He's got this peanut gallery, he's got these, and he'll make these jokes and you'll hear him, ha, ha, ha. This little gallery full of these stooges, really. and that's what gives him much of his authority and charm.
So one question on.
I'll be quiet.
I'll do my Gene Scott impression.
Okay.
No, I won't.
Well, actually, I don't know.
I'm teaching here. Go ahead.
Don't know if I asked this the first time I interviewed you, but I did kind of want to get back to the old days, the original, sort of the first time you did it out there on the beach, and what might have been some of the original motivations for taking a man down the beach and burning it.
That question.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you what I've been telling people for a couple of years. That our motivations, that my motivations weren't particularly unique. Because people ask that question and they think that they will find in my motive the germ of the meaning of the whole enterprise. In my personal case, there are probably a number of things. It was sort of, I was at a point of transformation in my life. I was entering into a fairly precocious middle age, and I was getting over of course, most famously among journalists, I was getting over a 3-year heartbreak over a love affair. And actually, if you survey people who come out there, that's often the case. Oftentimes they come out because they're ready for some great change in their life or experiencing some forced transformation in the midst of some kind of crisis. Those are those are very common, ordinary motives. But I think more significant is the fact of what happened after we set fire to it, not why we lit it. It's a distinction. When we set fire to it, people from all over the beach, far down the Strand, came running through the dark, appeared out of nowhere, suddenly surrounded us. There was a hippie who started playing the guitar. I think he had his pants on top of his head. suddenly we were joined by this sudden crowd of people, and everyone felt this solid sense of fellowship, as they regarded this man, this figure that in some crude way looked just like themselves and was burning against this cosmic vista behind him. It was that response, it was the thrill of that led us to do it again. And if we hadn't done it again, of course, it wouldn't exist. It was what the fire did to us, not what we intended to do with the fire. And that's probably the most relevant fact of that whole first experience.
Okay, and this is sort of on a different topic. I noticed that your son was out here last week at SOMAR. What does he think about the whole thing, Tristan?
Tristan? Oh, well, I'm not sure. I've only had intermittent contact with my son for the last 3 years. I think he's impressed because Tristan is, or Trey as he's known now, he wants very much to be cool. And it's kind of odd. It's usually young children look up to their parents and then disdain them when they hit the teenage years. Well, it's been the reverse for me. He looked down on me when he was a little kid for various reasons. And now that he's a teenager and thinks that I'm doing something that's cool in his circle, he's being able to look up to me. So that's an interesting development. What he really thinks of it, I don't know. I'll tell you later when I find out. And we were sandwiched in Spin magazine between Courtney Love and Madonna, so of course my 14-year-old son would think that was cool.
But if you're explaining Burning Man...
Spectator?
No, a Spectator is something else. No, I don't think the kid's reading the Spectator. He better not be.
So if you're explaining Burning Man to someone, you say it's sort of somewhere between Courtney Love and Madonna, and then that kind of...
Well, as far as Spin is concerned, in the cosmos,
that's their
according to Spin, that's where we fit, yeah. But, I hope people won't judge us by all of the company we keep.
So during this time of the year, what's sort of an average day in the life of Larry Harvey? What kind of things go on preparing for the desert?
This time of year?
Yeah.
Oh, it's pretty driven. There's a great deal to do. I spent the day in front of my computer. I'm responsible for authoring the schedule of events in the desert. Before this, it was this show that we were putting together. And whenever you put on a show, it gets very tense and stressful. And then, of course, we're only a month away from the desert. And however cool you remain, however cool you might seem, and I'm pretty good at seeming cool, any enterprise of moment that involves as much for us as this does, especially as more and more greater numbers of people begin coming, you inevitably feel the weight of that. And so it's not always fun, but certainly challenging. And our organization is we formed a very tight little community at the center of this, and we've become highly organized. We've kicked one another upstairs in different ways. I've managed to delegate a lot of responsibility, and ideally I will succeed in delegating responsibility so thoroughly that I won't have to do nothing. I'll just move between people with a clipboard in hand, and they'll think that I'm have better things to do.
Actually, that kind of leads me to my next question about when you actually get out to the desert. Does everybody sort of seek out the guy with the hat? And as far as the media, and do you spend a lot of time sort of doing kind of PR work out there? Or?
Last year I spent too much time doing PR work. It was ridiculous. I spent at least a third of my time in the desert in a little trailer talking to the media about how immediate an experience it was. There came a great rainstorm, this vast cataclysm that turned the playa to mud and was succeeded by the grandeur of a double rainbow. And I know this because I saw it on the video. I was sitting in the trailer at the time. Midway through this experience, the door was thrown open for the next journalist to come in. I glanced out the door and said, "Oh, look, a rainbow!" And then someone came in from a magazine, and then I proceeded to tell them how immediate, engrossing, and spontaneous this experience was. And it's one of those ironic reversals that now this year I'm intent on farming a lot of that out to the other people in the project who indeed have a great deal to say. The media will tend to come. They always want to pin things on personalities, and for journalistic purposes, and that makes always for good copy, and so that they'll want to talk to me, and it gratifies my ego to a degree, but only to a degree. I've got to the point where I would rather be left alone more often, and I am intent on communicating certain messages, however, and we work very hard at befriending the folks out there in TV land, or not the folks out in TV land, befriending the journalists so that they can communicate the message that we worked hard to communicate. What's the big one? CNN. Got around to asking our own flag, our own press person, why she was there, and as I think as a little joke for his own satisfaction, he put it in the tape. We knew what it represented. He was asking the woman who was responsible for conveying the entire message of our operation to the press, and when he asked her, she looked off into the horizon and was unable to find a single word to say, and I relished that. The press is funny, you know. Henry James said something interesting about the press, about journalism in general. He said periodicals are like trains that leave a station, and the schedule is very strict. They must leave the station on time, and they must be full of passengers. But of course, there are never enough passengers to fill the cars, and so mannequins are procured and fitted into the seats. And as the train goes by, the people standing at the siding see this wondrous spectacle of a train rushing by, apparently full of satisfied customers. And the only difference is when it arrives at the station, nobody stands up. And that's what magazines are like. They have a very short period of time. They have to grab the public interest quickly. If they don't have anything of substance to say, then they fall back upon style. They grow into the habit of substituting style for substance. That's the nature of the game, journalists deal in catchphrases. We have learned that if you supply them with the kind of information they're looking for and in a form which they can use, then they'll actually convey the message that you desire them to communicate, and it's a genuine service to them, and it serves us too. So far we have been journalism. It covers two kinds of stories. There are two things that make things news: change or conflict. So far, our story has been about change. We hope to avoid stories that are about conflict, real or imagined, because there really isn't any conflict out there, but you could trump it up, and sometime they may get tired of the change story and decide the conflict story might be. And an editor actually said that. As a woman, we've been trying to get into her magazine for 3 years, and finally, when she considered the idea, was quoted as saying, you know, that story's kind of passé. Why don't we run an expose? And that's the game of journalism. And but we try to play it and have succeeded pretty well, I think. The good thing about journalists is that reporters are curious people. That's why they got into it. And if you're doing something interesting, journalists are curious people, and if you can supply them with, they're genuinely avid to know things, and it's actually usually a lot of fun to talk to them.
I was going to ask you actually about.
Why don't you ask me about the satanic theme of this show?
Right. What is it? Why Dante's Inferno and Hellco and that sort of thing?
Well, this year's theme is hellish. I first got the idea because there were people coming out to the desert artists who were in effect doing hell in one form or another. They were blowing things up. They were doing these extravagantly destructive spectacles, and it seemed to me they must be doing that for some reason. And I thought perhaps we should channel this hellish energy and make it mean something. So this year our theme is the Inferno. I said in our literature that essentially hell is a place where one confronts whatever one has banished from one's world. Whatever you have cast out of your world or cast out of yourself, there rises up to confront you. And there's a great deal in our world that in fact, that we deny, that perhaps we need to confront. By one way of thinking about it, whenever I leave San Francisco and cross the Sacramento Valley, I am reminded that we live in a kind of hell. When I look at the developments extending like tapeworms across the landscape, great anonymous tapeworms, and when I see that the land being hung up as on butcher hooks, I see that the shopping centers spreading. It brings back to me again the entire American way of life that is based upon mass consumerism, in which people live anonymously, in which people live alienated from one another, in which all they have in common is their mass consumption of mass-produced goods, and that indeed I think is a kind of spiritual hell for all our wealth and for all our power in the world. I think the people in this country are desperately unhappy, and I think it's a cataclysm that's overtaking the entire world. In our conceit, in our adaptation of the Inferno theme, the narrative goes that Hellco has recently purchased hell and turned it into a theme park. Hellco represents, to me, that whole aspect of our modern mass economy. We have managed to take what were formerly the products of culture and should in some sense be sacred and converted them into commodities. And in fact, nearly everything in our experience is a commodity which you can buy and consume in isolation from other people. And this is a human catastrophe. I think we spend a lot of time in America and make a great deal of effort, expend a lot of effort in an attempt to deny the pain that people go through. We suffer from a massive sense of spiritual depletion in America, and it's a catastrophe increasingly that's overtaking the whole world. Entire populations are being uprooted, and have been in the West for 300 years. We live in a world of mass men who are disconnected to themselves, to those around them, and have no relation to anything greater than them. So that's what we're satirizing. The Hellco is hell is here, and hell is now, and Hellco, of course, runs it for money. So, you know, we thought, why not be blatant about it? Why not take the commodification of experience a step further and actively truck in souls? And in fact, that's what we've done. We've done a brisk business. In the times we live in today, I think people need a sense of security, and the soul is a great source of equity. You can pull value out of your soul. You can buy now, you can pay later, much later. If it weren't for the patent absurdity of it, indeed somebody would do a brisk business in it, and you would see it advertised on TV. Essentially, all the ads I see on TV are pretty much designed to buy people's souls. That's what they all do. We just made it apparent. It may seem absurd, but that's because it's really such a naked truth. We buy their souls on one side of this throne, and on the other side we suck the souls out of their body, and they're processed by by a sophisticated mechanism. Next door we run limbo, where your abandoned hopes are being processed. It's all very effective, and it's run by folks like you and me, who represent Hellco, helping people for millions of years.
Now, do you have any concerns that anyone might take it too seriously, either from the side of a fundamentalist or from the side of a real actual Satanist?
What frightens me is that a certain number of people do take it seriously, and that's because they feel threatened by it. It's because increasingly people are losing their sense of humor. In order to understand a joke, in order to entertain a sense of irony, you have to have your feet on the ground. You have to have a very strong sense you have to have a strong spiritual life. You have to have a sense of what is valuable and what your place in the world is, and what ought to be honored. If you're depleted in that way, you can't laugh at a joke. You cannot laugh at a joke. A joke is one way by which you can feel spiritually superior to adverse circumstances. But if you have a feeble grasp of what makes a life worth living, then you won't laugh at things. You won't be able to find them funny. Increasingly, I've found people, the kind of black humor that we use, and we use it for a good purpose, it's meant to be trenchant, it's meant to reach people in a very immediate, sometimes shocking way. But there are people, and it's not uncommon, who recoil from that with fear, who simply cannot see humor. They are spiritually enfeebled. But we haven't given up. We'll make them laugh yet.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier about society becoming so preoccupied with consumerism or commercialization and such. If that tried to sort of rear its ugly head out in the desert, would it be able to happen, or would people?
It's pretty hard for commercialism to thrive out in the desert. First of all, you're selling to people who don't have any clothes on half the time, so there's no deep pocket for them to reach into. Not only that, but I have found that if you want to make a lot of money off the crowd, what the first principles of marketing is that you have to make them passive. By an inverse ratio, to the degree that people feel passive, it will awaken an urge to fill that sense of emptiness with something that they can consume, with a commodity. By contrast, in the desert, where everyone is so immediately involved, in creating their own world around them, of contributing their energy to this thriving enterprise, they're not really in the consuming mood. They don't really feel like they need to consume anything. They're living their lives. If the powers that be ever, even when they ever understand the radical nature of the state of mind that we put people in, they won't like it at all. They won't like it at all because what we do is absolutely antithetical to the spirit of consumerism. In those circumstances, people come out and they think that they'll make a lot of money, and what they find, that they discover two things: that people are not at all in the consuming vein, and furthermore, that in order to peddle their little pile of goods, they have to stand by their car or their vehicle for long hours at a time, while all those around them are having the most wonderful time of their lives. And it's just too bitter a sacrifice to make. That sooner or later they cease to tend their goods, wander off, and have their own experience, and they go broke. They don't make any money. They lose money. The playa is not a good place to make money. They go broke. We've seen it several times. The only way you could make money out there is at the center, where everyone is drawn to the center. But we control the center, and we have kept the commerce at the center minimal, and we intend to keep it that way. We have passed up opportunities right and left to make money. We passed up opportunities to make money in deference to the community out there. We've let the little towns there, we've let them come in and make money. We gave them the ice concession. There's a hot spring that people will pay to go to this year. We could have horned in on some kind of deal with the local rancher and try. No, we'll let them have all the money. We'll let that money flow into the surrounding community and earn us goodwill, because our primary purpose out there isn't in fact to make money, to survive. Indeed, we have to make money. We have to be serious about it for this project to go forward. But it was never our primary motive, and it never will be. The other reason you can't make money out there is it's hard to make money, is you have to bring everything out there. Your power source, nothing's provided. There's nothing to plug into. The logistics are quite a trial. The weather is incredible. The dust is everywhere. The elements are buffeting you, and all of that. You can't imagine an environment that's less like a mall. A mall is meant to be is to have this sort of basal equilibrium, like this great holding tank that people will float through in a hypnagogic state, feeling a sense of inner depletion, and then having been made passive, they buy. The optimal conditions for consumption. They buy to fill their emptiness. And in the case out there, people suddenly feel that what's deep inside them is instinct with the horizon, and the world is full of possibility and suffused with an energy that's instinct with their own. Why would they need to consume? Why would they need to consume except to survive? And survival, and we've asked them ahead of time to think intently about the basis of survival, everything you absolutely need to survive. And it amounts to a kind of meditation, and they've come out there having meditated on that subject, and they feel self-sufficient. Many of them probably feel more self-sufficient than they ever have in their lives before, because they've grown up in a context where everything is imposed and everything is given, where they've been defined in terms of their deficiencies and their needs and their little appetites. And suddenly they're in a world where they feel liberated, where they feel They feel entirely self-sufficient. No, the playa is not a very good platform for consumption. It does not abet that aspect of the great American way of life. And that's one reason it's become the perfect home for us. That last was good. I like that.
That's beautiful. That's really good.
Well, I don't know. First of all, what would you do? Maybe you'd put people in little trains, and you take them around, and then you'd have exhibits that they would watch. That would. But that's Disneyland. Why would anyone go to the desert for that? You know, it's not the same thing. We're the absolute obverse of a theme park. You know, we're in our theme park. You know, you're the theme,
Actually, you know, that kind of leads me to one of the final questions I want to, or sort of one of the things that really struck me about the whole project is that the diversity of the types of artists and performance artists and static art and all that sort of thing, and I mean, it seems to be a great sort of medium for everybody to sort of come together and.
Well, it is that. To begin with, it kind of reduces people down to a state of radically naked humanness. You know, I mean, everyone's in the same boat. When a great storm comes through, it affects everyone in this massively immediate way, and that has a way of a woman came out there from LA one time and said, "This is great. It doesn't even seem to matter what kind of car you drive." It almost like cyberspace. It effaces class boundaries, economic boundaries. You know, I mean, everyone is just scurrying between earth and heaven, and confronting survival together. And that's a massive leveler. That makes it possible for people to talk, to bond with people around them who they wouldn't even talk to back in the city, where their lives are divided by walls and hierarchies of class and privilege and money. Those boundaries just fall away out there. It's the nature of the space for it to affect people in that way. As a result, what's happened with us practically, if you look at the artists who come out, suddenly we're seeing all of these underground artists surfacing out there on the playa who have been from every corner of the compass. Many of whom wouldn't talk to other artists doing other things before they were separated from them by all these artificial barriers of belief and lifestyle, and out there it's like they're stumbling out of this darkened cave, blinking in the sunlight, and they confronting one another for the first time. It's leading to a lot of collaboration. It's leading actually to a cultural groundswell. Suddenly there's all this cross-pollination that's going on. It's absolutely terrific. There's nothing like the power of culture that way. It's like the force of nature. It's absolutely prodigal once it gets going. So connections are being formed that weren't possible before because of the slotted way of life that we were trapped in back here, that bunker mentality, those divisions that seem so precious to us in the normal context of our lives, seem like vanities out there. Seem like essentially vanities, and they get swept away with the first big wind.
Now, would sort of on a kind of a final note, the legacy sort of Larry Harvey's existence here on Earth, and would it be said that you sort of helped affect some change in maybe people's way of thinking about things, or people's approach, possibly, or maybe on a grassroots level?
Well, it might have begun to. It's not writing an epitaph yet. might have possibly begun to. I was raised within a family that didn't communicate, and that within itself, and didn't communicate with the world outside of it, and in a state of fairly radical isolation from the rest of humanity, and thought from a very early age that there was something terribly wrong, and came to realize as I grew older that in fact my state was not unique, and that in some way it was emblematic of the state of the greater world, and that perhaps that there might be some way to gain some new landfall upon the shores of humanity. I suppose my idea was a childish and crude one. I always sort of dreamt of doing some creative thing, building a fort. I always wanted to dig these huge holes and make underground worlds and things like that, and doing that out there in the fields where I grew up, where I wandered alone, and but I dreamt that all the neighbors, all these people that I were never even allowed to know, really, might all gather somehow in the fields, together around some wonderful thing, and it was a crude, childish fantasy, but lo and behold, they've come. So Freud said that the only true happiness in this life is the realization of a childhood wish, and I think he's right.